Hey guys, welcome back for another Trick Tip Tuesday, and for this tip I'm going to talk about another way to be able to step up your metalwork. So obviously we all pick up whatever our choice of hammers and dollies is, and we usually just get right to work. But if you ask any professional metal shaper, one way to step up the difference between, I would say, standard hammer and dolly work to being able to do hammer and dolly work that really can bring out and accentuate the metalwork that you're doing is to actually sand and finish out the surfaces of your dollies and your hammers. So what I mean by that is, dollies especially, when these things are made, they're kind of a rough grind. They get them made, then they polish them out, and if you really look at the surface of them, there's areas where the finish isn't that great. You can see little changes in the surface. So something I like to do is to grab a sanding block, some sandpaper, and start scuffing up the surface. And what that does is it's going to highlight any imperfections in the surface of the dolly. Because if you're doing hammer and dolly work and you're trying to really smooth out the surface of something and really bring out the finish in your work, if you're hammering against something that is not as smooth as what you're trying to achieve, you can still achieve quality metal work, but maybe it might take a little longer. You might be trying to make up for, without even really knowing it, make up for imperfections in the tooling that you're using. So, when you use a planishing hammer like the Pro line behind me, those dies are all CNC machined and then polished. So the dies have a really nice, true finish to them. But these aren't CNC machined. These are just basically poured and then polished up, and they get sent out to you and you get to use them. But it's might be kind of hard to tell on camera, but basically once you start scuffing them up, you can use some die cam or something like that on the surface of them. But if you really look at the surface, you can start to see imperfections in there, and that can not only be caused by the production process of these, but if you're using it for quite a while, like I've had this dolly for many years, and I've sanded it up, polished it up many times. But what happens is, as you hammer it, scuff on it here, as you hammer it, depending on what type of hammering you're doing and where you're doing it, there's actually little ding marks in the surface here from the hammer. So it's always a good idea to resurface your dollies to get the finish and get the surface back to where it should be to be able to do better metal work at that point. So just always keep an eye on your dollies, and really, so I guess the process would be, if you find imperfections in the surface, if you're sanding them up, I specifically don't have a guaranteed method that I use every time, but if I notice there's a low spot in something, it all is going to depend on how big that low spot is. So if something I'm working on has like this right here had all those little dings in it, I'm not just going to use a sanding block to sit here and try to sand those out, because I'll be there for a long time. So sometimes what I'll do is either take a DA sander or even a little disc sander, a belt sander, something to at least get all my dings and marks out of the surface, and then I'll go back at it with the block to see where my imperfections are and keep polishing and working from there. So on the dollies, I don't worry about as much about like a polished surface on the dolly itself, because usually you're on the back side of a part typically. You're hammering usually from the outside, and that's where, like with hammers, what I do like to do is, it's kind of the same thing. These things get made, they get sanded, they get finished out, and depending on who makes your hammer, sometimes the surface is going to be pretty nice, and other times it's going to be less than nice. So you can sand these up. Now these Covell hammers have a real nice finish on them, and they're a pretty true surface to start with. But you can even ask Ron Covell himself, and he'll even say that it's a good idea to check the surfaces of your hammers even polish them out. Some guys will want to polish them out to a full polish, but I don't always know that that's necessary. It depends on what you're working on. If you are using a steel hammer, let's say on aluminum, on a soft metal, it actually could be a good idea to polish out the surface to a really nice polish, because you're going to get all of the sanding scratches out of it. Because if the grinding and sanding scratches in the surface of your hammer are too aggressive, they'll actually transfer over onto the surface of your material, especially on a soft material. So if you're doing aluminum, you know, and you're hammer and dollying on there, you're going to leave whatever marks are in the face of the hammer are going to be transferred over onto that soft surface and be transferred over. So you can polish these out to a high polish, but just something to think about if you're looking for ways to step up your metal work is to check out some of your basic tools, your hammer and dolly, and see what you can do to make them better. So hopefully this tip will give you something to look at in your own shop. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.